Hello and welcome to a special BriefingsDirect podcast coming to you from the 2017 SAP Ariba Live Conference in Las Vegas. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host, here the week of March 20, as we explore the latest in collaborative commerce and learn how innovative companies are leveraging the networked economy. Our next Digital Business Insights discussion explores the successful habits, practices, and cultures that define highly effective procurement organizations. We'll now examine unique new research that identifies and measures how innovative companies have optimized their practices to overcome the many challenges facing business-to-business commerce. To learn more about the traits and best practices of the most successful procurement organizations, please join me now in welcoming our guest. We're here with Kay-Ree Lee. He's Director of Business Analytics and Insights at SAP Ariba. Welcome, Kay-Ree.
Thank you, Dana. It's great to be here at Ariba Live.
We're glad to have you. You know, procurement is more complex than ever. The supply chains stretch around the globe. Regulation is on the rise, and risk is heightened across many fronts. So innovative companies have figured out how to overcome many of these challenges, and you've uncovered some of their secrets through your annual benchmarking survey. Tell us about your research and your findings.
Okay. Well, every year we launch a large benchmark program that combines a traditional survey with data from the procurement applications as well as business network. I'll share a few stats about this program. This past year, we had more than 200 customers participate, covering more than $400 billion in spend. What we then did is we analyzed the quantitative and qualitative responses of the survey and identified the intersection between those responses for top performers compared to average performers to draw correlations between what top performers did well and the practices that drove those achievements.
Okay. How is this different? What's changed? What are you seeing as sort of long-term trends?
Okay. There are three things that are quite different from when we talked about this in the past year. The number one trend that we saw was that digital procurement is gaining momentum quickly. A lot of organizations are now offering self-service tools to their internal stakeholders. And these self-service tools really enable the user to evaluate and compare item specifications and purchase items in an electronic marketplace, which allows them to operate 24/7 around the clock. They're also utilizing digital networks to reach and collaborate with others on a large scale. The second trend that we saw from the data was that risk management is really an area that most organizations know is important and critical. But what they are not aware of is that for an average company, a large proportion of their spend is not managed. And if this spend remains unmanaged, then you're probably not managing the risk for this unmanaged spend. And so what happens when something unexpected occurs to the non-managed spend? And then the third trend that we saw from the data is compliance management is what will help organizations deliver savings to the bottom line. Now, capturing savings continues through sourcing and negotiation is a good start. But at the end of the day, really eliminating the loopholes through a focus on implementation and compliance management is what will deliver realized savings.
Mm-hmm. You've uncovered maybe we could call them secrets, the secret sauce behind the success. Maybe you could dig into those a little bit.
Yeah. From the data, we identified really 5 key takeaways. We see procurement organizations continue to expand their sphere of influence to greater depth and quality. Now, this is important because it shows that the procurement organization and the work we do matters to a lot of organizations. Right? So the work is starting to matter more and more. The second takeaway that we saw was, as procurement professionals, cost savings is a measure that is near and dear to all of our hearts. But the leading organizations are focused on cost reduction, but they're also focused on capturing value in other areas beyond cost savings. So they're leaving behind cost savings and tracking value in other areas. The third takeaway that we saw was that digital procurement is front and center in people's minds, and this was reflected in the transactional data that we extracted. I talked about risk management earlier, and it should be a key focus area instead of just tracking the news. And then I talked about the fifth one as well, which is compliance management really helps procurement to deliver bottom line savings by closing the different loopholes.
All right. What are some of the best practices that are driving more of the strategic perspective that procurement is having in its companies? So not just the looking at specific points of data, but qualitative, cultural types of takeaways.
Culturally, procurement needs to be proactive in engaging the business. They should have a mentality of helping the business solve business problems as opposed to following a procurement process each time. Culturally, they should also focus on broadening the value proposition of procurement. So instead of, again, focusing on transactional or sourcing, we see leading organizations now focus more on contribution to revenue, perhaps, or involvement in product development or co-innovation, perhaps. So all of those skills are important to organizations from a cultural perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. And focusing in on how technology is becoming more important, in many cases we see the use of technology having sort of a virtuous adoption cycle. That is to say, the more technology you use, the better you become at it, and the more technology you then pursue, and so on. Where are we seeing that, and how are those organizations that are highly technical able to have an advantage?
Okay. Companies that adopt these practices are really able to elevate their procurement performance and achieve excellence. Now, this is also just a start, right? We see procurement organizations pivoting towards more advanced and futuristic concepts and leaving behind cost reduction and cost efficiency, right? Digital procurement utilizing electronic marketplaces, virtual catalogs, visibility into the life cycle of transactions, predictive risk management, and utilizing large volumes of data to improve decision-making are some of the key capabilities that benefit the bold and the future-minded. Right? This really enables the transformation of procurement and forms new roles and requirements for the future procurement organization.
Of course, we're also seeing more analytics become available as we have more data-driven processes. Is there any indication in your research that procurement people are adopting more sort of data scientist types of thinking? How are they utilizing analysis more now that that data and analysis is available through the technology? Or perhaps they want it to be invisible. They want the technology to be driven to a user experience rather than them having to come up with queries and comb through results.
You're right. The users of procurement data want insights. And I'll share a couple of companies that we're working with on. They're both actively researching, analyzing, and using their data to answer questions like, how do we validate that the prices we're paying is competitive in the marketplace? So after we source an event, we implement those categories. But how do we validate that those contracts and prices are really competitive, particularly in other regions of the world? How do we categorize our spend accurately if some of it or all of it or a lot of it is free form to ensure that we're using the right contracts with the right pricing? So if you can imagine, when people enter transactions in the system, not all of it is contract-based or catalog-based. There's a lot of free-form text. But how do you extract all of that data, cleanse it, mine it, make sense out of it to make informed business decisions and create insights? So this goes back to the managing compliance practice we talked about earlier. And they're also looking to answer questions like, how do we scale supplier risk management to manage all suppliers systematically as opposed to just managing your top-tier suppliers? So these two companies that are on the top of my mind and are really taking it further in terms of creating advantages that start to imbue excellence into modern procurement and their operations.
Kairi, are we able to distill perhaps some recommendations now that you've been tracking this benchmark survey for a few years, looking at this year's results? What would you recommend that people do based on your findings?
Okay. There are 3 or 4 different recommendations that we have. One is that we continue to see that procurement should expand their span of influence across the organization. The second one is really around capturing savings. And from a savings perspective, the recommendation we have is continue to track sourcing savings, because sourcing savings and cost reduction savings is important. But there are other other measures of value to track beyond cost savings, to include things like contribution to revenue, involvement in product development, etc. So that's one of our key recommendations. The second key recommendation that we have is, and it relates to the finding that we have about digital procurement firing on all cylinders, it's really to embrace technology and digital procurement, right? With all the new technology and the innovations that Ariba, for example, has come up with and we've introduced at Ariba Live, I think the user really has an advantage in terms of going out there, evaluating what's out there, trying it out, and then seeing what works for them. The third recommendation, this focuses on really transaction efficiency, because we talked about organizations going global. Now, the way that procurement can support organizations going global by doing more with less is by offering self-service technology, because by offering self-service technology, nobody really needs to be there to create a transaction, right? The user can go on the system, on the procurement system, and really actually create transactions while their counterparts in other parts of the world may not be working at the same time. Mm-hmm. Right? The fourth recommendation we have is related to risk management. And risk management, now we're not talking about just news tracking. A lot of organizations I've personally seen in the industry, when they say risk management, they're tracking news. Now, risk management to include things like predictive analytics, predictive risk measures beyond your strategic suppliers, right? So not only for your strategic suppliers, to the extent that you can measure risk for all your suppliers. Why not? If it's systematic, we have ability to manage a large volume of suppliers, manage all of them. And then for the ones that bubble to the top are the ones that are risky, then those are the ones that you try to create a contingency plan for. Right, that will help your organization really prepare to respond to disruptions in the business. And then the last recommendation that we have is around compliance management, which is internal compliance and external compliance. Internal adherence to procurement policies and procedures, and then external to governmental regulations will actually help the organization close the loopholes and ensure sourcing savings get to the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. So when we have companies that we can examine through this data, we've got leaders and we've got perhaps laggards, and there's a delta between them. In trying to encourage laggards to transform, to be more digital, to take upon themselves some of these recommendations that you have, how can we entice them? What do you get when you are a leader? What defines the business value that you can deliver when you're taking advantage of these technologies, following these best practices? In other words, why is it important, and why would you be incentivized to go about transformation? Is it that big of a deal in terms of your paybacks?
I think it is for numerous reasons. Number one is being a top performer, you attract a talent pool that would help your procurement organization perform better. Right, so if you look ahead, a lot of research has indicated that there may be a talent shortage in procurement. But as a top performer, if you go out and recruit, it may be easier to help recruit talent to the organization, because people want to do cool things. They want to do advanced things. They want to use advanced technology.
Wrapping up, we're seeing some very new and compelling technologies here at Ariba Live 2017. More use of artificial intelligence, more use of bringing tools into a context so that they can be of use to procurement of people during a cycle or process. As we think about the future and more of these technologies becoming available, what is it that companies should be doing in order to put themselves in the best position to take advantage of that? Is there a new mindset? Is there, again, the increased recognition of technology and ability to work with it? What would you tell people to get ready for some of the new technologies so that they can be even more competitive?
I think it's important to be curious about the technology out there, and perhaps structure the organization in such a way that there's a team or there's people on the procurement team who are continuously evaluating the different procurement technology from different vendors out there, making a decision on what best fits the organization, right? So having people who can look ahead and evaluate and talk about the requirements and understand the architecture and think about what's out there, what would make sense for us in the future, as well as this is probably a pretty complex role that the person has to take. He or she has to understand the current architecture of the business, the requirements from the stakeholders, and then evaluate what's available out there and how does it assist the organization in the future in adopting these software solutions, and what's the ROI or the payback for some of these solutions, right? So I think being curious, understanding the business really well, and then having wearing a technology hat and really trying to understand what's out there in the business, what else is available is going to be helpful for organizations to see and adopt some of these new technologies coming out.
Sounds like very good advice. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been talking about new research that identifies and measures how innovative companies have figured out how to overcome the many challenges facing business-to-business commerce. And we've learned about some of the latest successful habits, practices, and cultures that define highly effective procurement organizations. So please join me in thanking our guest. We've been here with Kay-Ree Lee, the Director of Business Analytics and Insights at SAP Ariba. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining us for this special podcast coming to you from the 2017 SAP Ariba Live Conference in Las Vegas. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host throughout this series of SAP Ariba-sponsored BriefingsDirect Digital Business Insights discussions. Thanks again for listening, and do come back next time.